This isn't some story I read in a book. It's a warning etched into the last years of my life. What I'm about to tell you is the truth of what happened to me and how I was forced to become someone my husband never would have recognized. The air in my own hallway felt stolen, thin and cold, as I watched the polished tip of Julian's shoe nudge the base of the grandfather clock my Robert had bought at an estate sale in Sausalito 40 years ago. My nephew stood beside a woman in a severe pantsuit, a stranger who was appraising my home, not with the warmth of a guest, but with the predatory gaze of a developer. It was the heavy, ornate brass key to the front door resting on the hall table where I'd left it that morning that caught my eye when Julian finally spoke the words that cleaved my life in two. The house has excellent bones, and the probate court just finalized the transfer. He said not to me, but to her. My aunt understands she needs to be in a more manageable facility. We can have it cleared out and listed by the 1st of the month. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel. Tell us where you're from and what time it is. Right now, it's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. My name is Evelyn Reed, and for 71 years I believed in the fundamental goodness of people. It was a belief I shared with my husband Robert. He was an architect, a man who saw the world in lines and structures and foundations built to last our home. A 3-story Victorian on a quiet, fog-kissed street in Pacific Heights was his masterpiece. He hadn't built it, but he had resurrected it. When we bought it in the 70s, it was a decaying, painted lady, its grandeur suffocated by neglect. For 3 decades, it was our shared project, our sanctuary. Every inch of that house held a memory of him. The bay window in the parlor, where he'd read the paper every Sunday, the rosewood banister he'd spent a month sanding, and staining himself the garden out back, where he'd planted my favorite sterling silver roses the day after our 25th anniversary. When Robert passed away from a sudden heart attack 2 years ago, the house became a museum of our life together. The silence was a physical presence, a weight in every room. I was adrift. That's when my nephew Julian stepped in. He was my sister's son, a handsome, charismatic man in his late 30s with a smile that could disarm a firing squad. I hadn't seen much of him over the years. He was a busy financial advisor in the city, always flying between San Francisco and New York, closing deals, living a life that seemed a universe away from my quiet existence. But after the funeral, he was a constant presence. He brought groceries, fixed the leaky faucet in the kitchen Robert never got around to, and most importantly, he sat with me in the deafening silence and just talked. He talked about his work, his travels, and he'd listen, really listen. When I spoke about Robert, he made me feel like I wasn't entirely alone. "Aunt Evelyn," he said one afternoon, about 6 months, after Robert's passing, his voice a perfect blend of concern and professionalism. He was sitting at my dining room table, a leather-bound portfolio open before him. The table was Robert's, designed a solid slab of mahogany that could seat 12. Julian made it look like a boardroom. I've been looking over Uncle Robert's portfolio. He was a brilliant man, but his investments are, well, they're a bit dated, very conservative. In this market, your assets are practically stagnant. You're losing money to inflation? I remember nodding, feeling a wave of gratitude. I knew nothing of stocks or bonds. Robert had handled everything. The language of finance was as foreign to me as ancient Greek. He always said to be careful. I murmured more to the ghost in the room than to Julian. And he was right to be Julian? Agreed, his smile, reassuring. But being careful and being smart are 2 different things in today's world. Let me help. I can consolidate everything. Move it into a more dynamic trust that will not only protect your principal, but generate a significant income. You'll never have to worry about a thing. We'll get all your bills on auto pay, set up a generous monthly stipend for you. You deserve to relax, to enjoy your golden years without stressing over paperwork. It sounded like a lifeline. He made it all seem so simple, so logical. He was family. He was my blood. Over the next few weeks, he arrived with stacks of documents, each one filled with dense, intimidating print, had patiently point to the signature lines summarizing each page with soothing, impenetrable jargon. This just gives me limited power of attorney to manage the assets in the trust, he'd say. Or, this one is just a standard custodial agreement for the brokerage transfer I signed, where he pointed my hand guided by a trust so absolute it was blinding. I felt a profound sense of relief, as if I had handed over a great heavy burden to someone stronger and more capable. Julian wasn't just my nephew. He was my savior. The first tremor of unease was so small I almost dismissed it. I was the treasurer for my local gardening club, a position I'd held for a decade. Every year I made a personal donation of $500. I wrote the check as usual and mailed it. A week later I received a polite, slightly embarrassed call from Margaret, the club president. The check had bounced. I was mortified. My cheeks burned with the shame I hadn't felt since I was a child. I immediately called Julian. Oh, for heaven's sake, he'd laughed a dismissive, airy sound over the phone. Aunt Evelyn, don't you worry, it's a clerical hiccup. When we consolidated the accounts, the old checking number was deactivated. I must have forgotten to send you the new checkbook. My sincerest apologies. I'll wire the $500 directly to the club and add another $500 for their trouble. See, all handled. He was so smooth, so quick to solve the problem, that my shame was replaced once again by gratitude. He even sent a massive bouquet of orchids to Margaret with a note of apology. She called me gushing about my wonderfully thoughtful nephew. But then other things started to happen. A final notice from P. Gio. He arrived in the mail, its red lettering a shock against the white envelope. I called Julian again. Damn computers, he'd sighed. The autopay must not have linked correctly. I'll handle it personally right now. And he did. The lights stayed on. Each incident was isolated, each one explained away with a plausible excuse and a swift resolution. But they were like tiny cracks spreading across a porcelain vase. He started making subtle comments, always couched in concern. Are you remembering to take your vitamins, Aunt Evelyn? You seem a bit forgetful lately, or maybe we should get you one of those pill organizers. It's easy to lose track. I'd walk into a room and forget why I was there. Something everyone does. But if he was present, he'd click his tongue softly and say, "See, this is what I'm worried about." He was planting a seed, not just in my mind, but in the minds of anyone who would listen. My friends, my neighbors. The narrative was slowly being written. Evelyn, the poor grieving widow, is starting to lose her faculties. The turning point, the moment the crack shattered the vase entirely, happened at my local bank branch, a place where I'd known the manager, Mr. Henderson, since he was a teller with a bad haircut. I went in to get a roll of quarters for the laundry. It was a simple, mundane errand. The young teller I approached smiled, but her eyes held a flicker of something I couldn't place. Pity, perhaps? She typed my name into her computer, and her smile faltered. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Reed," she said, her voice dropping. "Your personal accounts were closed last month. All funds were transferred to the Robert and Evelyn Reed Family Trust." "Yes, I know that, dear," I said patiently. "My nephew handles all of that. I just need a roll of quarters. Can't you just take it from the trust?" She shook her head, looking deeply uncomfortable. "I can't do that, Mom. You're not listed as a signatory with withdrawal access on that account. Only the trustee, Julian Vance, can authorize transactions." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The marble floor felt like shifting sand beneath my feet. Not a signatory on my own money, Roberts? Money, that can't be right. I stammered. There must be a mistake. The teller looked over her shoulder toward Mr. Henderson's office. He'd seen me and was already walking over his face, a mask of professional concern. "Evelyn, is everything all right?" he asked, his voice low. I explained the situation, my voice trembling slightly. He led me into his glass-walled office and pulled up the account information. He turned the screen toward me, his finger tracing the lines of text. "Julian set this up as an irrevocable trust. Evelyn has, the sole trustee. According to this, you are the beneficiary, and he is legally obligated to manage the funds for your well-being, but you don't have direct access to the capital. It's a very restrictive structure. Usually it's designed for beneficiaries who are unable to manage their own affairs. The unspoken words hung in the air between us for the infirm, for the incompetent, for the senile. That was the moment I understood the bounced check, the late notices, the concerned comments about my memory. They weren't accidents or signs of his care. They were brushstrokes in the masterpiece of his betrayal, painting a portrait of a helpless old woman who needed to be protected from herself. He hadn't just taken control of my money. He had taken control of my identity. I walked home in a daze, the San Francisco fog feeling like a shroud. I let myself in with the heavy brass key and stood in the hallway, the silence of the house no longer comforting but menacing. It was the silence of a tomb. Julian had told me the trust was to protect me. A shield, but it wasn't a shield. It was a cage. And as I stood there tracing the familiar patterns in the Persian runner, I realized the final chilling truth. The cage wasn't just for my money. He wanted the house, too. Robert's house, my home. And he was building his case, brick by brick, lie by lie, to take that as well. A cold fury. An emotion I hadn't felt in decades began to smolder in the pit of my stomach. It was a feeling so alien yet so powerful. It burned away the fog of my grief and left behind a terrifying clarity. Julian thought he was dealing with a fragile old woman. He was about to find out how wrong he was. He had no idea what a woman with nothing left to lose was capable of. My first call wasn't to a lawyer. It was to a man my husband had once called the most stubborn bulldog he'd ever met. Frank Miller was a retired SFPD fraud detective, a gruff no-nonsense man who now ran a small private investigation firm out of a dusty office in the Tenderloin. He owed Robert a favor from 30 years ago, a favor Frank insisted could never truly be repaid. I decided it was finally time to collect. I sat across from Frank in his cluttered office, the smell of stale coffee and old paper hanging heavy in the air. He listened without interruption, his face impassive, his sharp blue eyes fixed on me as I laid out the whole sordid story, from Julian's cloying sympathy to the humiliating conversation in Mr. Henderson's office. When I finished, I handed him the stack of documents Julian had left with me, copies of the trust, the power of attorney, all the papers I had signed in my fog of grief and trust. My hands trembled as I pushed them across his desk. They felt like a confession of my own foolishness. Frank picked up the top document, a 70-page behemoth, establishing the irrevocable trust. He didn't read it so much as scan it, his eyes darting across the pages with an unnerving speed. He was silent for a long time, the only sound the faint hum of a dying fluorescent light above us. I felt a knot of despair tighten in my chest. Perhaps I was wrong. Perhaps this was all legal. Perhaps I really was just a confused old woman. Finally, he looked up, his gaze piercing. Robert was a good man, Evelyn. He designed my daughter's first home, never charged us a dime for the blueprints. He said, his voice a low rumble. He tapped that thick finger on a specific clause deep within the trust document. Your nephew is smart, very smart. This paperwork is ironclad. He's used every legal loophole designed to protect the elderly, to strip you of your autonomy. On paper, you willingly gave him everything. A good lawyer might be able to argue undue influence, but it would be your word, the word of a forgetful 71-year-old woman, against his. The hope that had carried me to his office curdled into dread. So there's nothing I can do. Frank leaned back in his creaking chair, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a hunter. I didn't say that, he said slowly. The law is one thing. People are another, guys like your nephew. The slick smiling ones who think they're the smartest person in every room, they have a weakness. They're arrogant. They believe their own hype. They get sloppy. He's built a fortress of paper around you, but a fortress is only as strong as its architect. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He thinks he's already won. That's the most powerful weapon you have right now. He sees a grieving widow. He doesn't see Robert's wife. That one sentence sent a jolt of electricity through me. Robert's wife. I had been a partner in every sense of the word. I had managed the books for his firm for the first 10 years. I had reviewed contracts negotiated with stubborn suppliers and entertained clients with a grace that belied a will of iron. I had let my grief soften me, but the steel was still there, just buried. Frank saw it. What do? Frank, I asked, my voice steady now. You do nothing, he replied. You play the part he's written for you. You are the frail, slightly confused, grateful aunt. You call him, you thank him for handling the bank issue. You apologize for your confusion. You make him believe you are completely and utterly defeated. And while you're doing that, I'm going to start looking into Mr. Julian Vance. A man this meticulous at building a cage for his aunt has to have practiced on someone else first, leaving his office. I felt a strange sense of calm descend upon me. The grief was still there, a hollow ache in my chest, but it was now accompanied by something else. Purpose, a cold, clear driving purpose. That evening I did the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I picked up the phone, dialed Julian's number, and when he answered, I made my voice tremble. Just so, Julian, dear, I began, forcing a note of weary confusion into my tone. I was at the bank today. I got so flustered. I'm so sorry. Thank you for setting all that up. I don't know what I'd do without you. His sigh on the other end was a symphony of condescending pity. It's all right, Aunt Evelyn. Don't you worry your pretty little head about it. That's why I'm here, to handle the complicated things. You just focus on your garden. Yes, dear, I said softly. My garden. I hung up the phone and walked to the window overlooking the backyard. The sterling silver roses Robert had planted were in full bloom, their delicate lavender petals catching the last rays of the setting sun. I looked at my own hands, at the wrinkled skin and the age spots. These were not the hands of a helpless woman. They were the hands that had built a life, that had held my husband's hand as he passed, that had tended this garden for 40 years, and they were the hands that were going to tear Julian's world apart, piece by piece. A week later, Frank called. I've got something, he said, without preamble. It's thin, but it's a thread. Your nephew's previous employer was a boutique wealth management firm in Palo Alto. He left 2 years ago, right after Robert died, to start his own company. I ran a check on the senior partner of his old firm, a man named Marcus Thorne. Thorne retired abruptly about 6 months after Julian left, sold his mansion in Los Altos Hills, moved to a condo in Boca Raton. According to the paperwork, he took an early retirement for health reasons, and you don't believe it? I asked. Marcus Thorne was 62 and ran a marathon a month. Frank grunted. The man was healthier than I was at 30. Something doesn't add up. Your nephew learned his trade somewhere. I have a feeling Mr. Thorne was his first lesson. The problem was, Thorne had completely disappeared. His old numbers were disconnected, and the address in Boca was a mail drop. It was a dead end. Let me think about it, I said, my mind already racing. Marcus Thorne. The name was vaguely familiar. Robert had known a lot of people in the Bay Area's financial circles. I spent the next 2 days in Robert's, study a room I hadn't been able to bring myself to properly clean out. It was still exactly as he'd left it. His reading glasses were on a stack of architectural digests. A half-empty glass of scotch sat on a coaster, and on his desk his old Rolodex, an ancient relic in a digital world. I started flipping through it card by card, a litany of ghosts and old friends. And then I found it, tucked between Thompson and Toomey, a card for Marcus Thorne with an office number, a home number, and scribbled in Robert's familiar scrawl on the back, another number labeled Fishing Cabin Tahoe. It was a long shot, a cabin he owned years ago, but it was the only shot I had. I dialed the number, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. It rang 4 times, and I was about to hang up when a man's voice, raspy and irritated, answered, Yeah? Is this Marcus Thorne? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. There was a long pause. Who's asking? He said, his tone laced with suspicion. I took a deep breath. My name is Evelyn Reed. My late husband was Robert Reed, and I believe we have a mutual friend in my nephew Julian Vance. The silence that followed was so profound, so heavy with unspoken meaning, that I knew with absolute certainty I had found Frank's thread, and I was about to pull on it with all my might. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for a full 10 seconds. When Marcus Thorne finally spoke, his voice was a low, guttural growl stripped of its earlier irritation and replaced with something that sounded like pure, unadulterated venom. Julian Vance is. Not my friend, he hissed. That boy is a snake in a $1,000 suit. What do you want? I chose my words carefully, keeping my voice calm and steady. The voice of a reasonable woman seeking information, not a victim seeking an ally. Mr. Thorne, I believe my nephew has managed my late husband's estate in a way that is remarkably similar to how he might have managed the accounts of your former clients, has very good with trusts, especially irrevocable ones. Another pause, this one, crackling with tension. I could picture him in a remote cabin surrounded by pine trees, the ghosts of his past swirling around him. Lady, I don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his denial was paper thin. It was the automatic response of a man who had been burned so badly he was terrified of the fire. I have the documents, Mr. Thorne, I said softly. The ones he had me sign, I'm looking at them right now. They're designed to make a person feel safe while they're being robbed blind. I'm just a widow and he's my only family. I'm sure everyone thinks he's a saint for taking care of his dotty old aunt. I imagine you found yourself in a similar position, untouchable, your reputation against his. He let out a short, bitter laugh that was more of a cough. Reputation? Yeah. He torched it. He picked one client, a wealthy widow just like you, and created a complex trust that essentially gave him total control. Then he used her as a template, a proof of concept to lure in others. He was good. He was charming. The clients loved him. By the time I realized what he was doing, he had siphoned millions into offshore accounts through a labyrinth of shell corporations. When I confronted him, he just smiled. Thorne's voice was tight with remembered fury. He told me that if I went to the authorities, he would leak documents, forged but brilliant forgeries, implicating me as the mastermind. He said he would ruin me. It would be my word against the charming young man who had grown my firm's portfolio by 30%. He'd paint me as the aging, greedy partner trying to frame the rising star. He knew I didn't have the stomach for a long, ugly legal battle that would destroy the firm I'd spent my life building. So I retired, I took the hit, signed a non-disclosure agreement he'd drafted, and walked away. He let me keep enough to live on as long as I kept my mouth shut. He called it a severance package. My blood ran cold. This was who Julian was. Not just a common thief, but a meticulous psychological predator. He didn't just steal money. He stole lives, reputations, legacies. He left his victims trapped in silent prisons of shame and legal entanglement. He's taking my house. Mr. Thorne, I said, my voice quiet but firm. The house my husband and I built together. He's trying to have me declared incompetent so he can put me in a home. That's his endgame, Thorne spat. Isolate the asset, then liquidate it. Hell, sell your house, and the money will vanish into the same digital black hole where my client's money went, and hell do it with a concerned look on his face, telling everyone how he's doing. What's best for his poor dear aunt? A new kind of resolve hardened within me. It was no longer just about getting my money back or saving my home. It was about justice. For me, for Marcus Thorne, for the faceless widow who was Julian's. First victim, he made a mistake with you, I said, that non-disclosure agreement. Does it prevent you from speaking to federal investigators if you are subpoenaed? Thorne was silent for a moment. No, he said slowly, the gears clearly turning in his head. A subpoena would supersede the NDA. But who's going to issue one? You don't have enough proof to get a DA to even look at this case, let alone the feds. Not yet, I said, but I will, and when I do, I need to know you'll be ready to testify. Lady, he said, a grudging respect entering his tone for the first time, you get the SEC or the FBI to knock on my door and I'll sing like a canary on Christmas morning. I have been dreaming of the day I get to see that smug bastard in handcuffs. I hung up the phone, the conversation having confirmed my worst fears, but also having given me a crucial piece of the puzzle. Julian had a pattern, and he had an accomplice, whether he knew it or not, his own monumental arrogance. He was so confident in his legal fortress, so sure of my weakness that he wouldn't be looking for an attack, especially not from me. I called Frank and relayed the conversation with Thorne. It's a start. Frank said, his voice grim. It gives us a motive and a modus operandi. But Thorne is right. We don't have anything actionable. We need paper. We need bank records, transfer logs, something that shows the money moving from your trust to something he controls. His personal accounts are probably clean. Hez too smart for that. The money will be moving through a series of LLCs. How do we find them? I asked. We can't. Not without a warrant. It's a classic. Catch-22. You can't get the warrant without the evidence, and you can't get the evidence without the warrant. Frank explained the frustration evident in his voice. We need something else, something he's hidden in plain sight. For the next week, I played the part of the perfect victim I called Julian to ask him simple questions about the mail. I'd feign confusion over a letter from the AIRP. I let him hear the television playing too loudly in the background. I was building his confidence, lulling the snake to sleep. During the day, I was a detective in my own home. I scoured Robert's old files, searching for anything that might connect to Julian. I found nothing. Julian had been meticulous. All the new financial documents were online, accessible only through a portal to which he held the only key. The break came from the most unexpected of places, the society pages of the San Francisco Chronicle. My neighbor Eleanor brought it over with a plate of scones. Look, Evelyn, she said, pointing to a glossy photo. Isn't that your handsome nephew? There he was smiling his $1,000,000 smile, his arm around a woman dripping in diamonds. The caption read, Julian Vance, CEO of Vance Capital Partners, and philanthropist Beatrice. Langford at the preparatory gala for the Children's Hospital Foundation benefit. Vance is this year's chairman and has pledged to personally match all donations. I stared at the photo at the name of his company, Vance Capital Partners. It was a name I'd seen on the letterhead of the documents he'd given me. He was the CEO. He wasn't just my nephew, the helpful financial advisor. He was the head of his own firm, an army of one, and he was positioning himself as a major city philanthropist. This wasn't just about greed. It was about power, social standing. He wanted to be one of the city's elite, a modern-day Carnegie, all built on a foundation of stolen money, and that's when I saw it, his weakness. The thing he craved even more than money, public adoration. He wasn't just hiding his crimes, he was flaunting his success, daring the world to look closer, convinced his tracks were perfectly covered. I went to my husband's desk and pulled out a magnifying glass. I looked at the documents Julian had given me again. This time I wasn't looking at the legal clauses. I was looking at the letterhead, Vance Capital Partners. At the bottom in tiny print was an address. It wasn't a grand office in the financial district as I would have expected. It was a suite number at a building on Montgomery Street that I knew housed hundreds of virtual offices, essentially mailboxes for hire. He didn't have a real office. He was putting on a show. Frank had said we needed something hidden in plain sight. Julian's entire life was hidden in plain sight. He was projecting an image of immense wealth and stability, but the foundation had to be shaky. A man moving that much money through shell corporations needed a physical hub somewhere, a place to keep records, a server, something tangible. It wouldn't be at his high-rise apartment. That would be too risky. It wouldn't be at the virtual office. It had to be somewhere he felt was secure. Somewhere no one would ever think to look. A cold certainty settled over me. There was only one place. He felt that safe, that untouchable, a place he could visit at any time without raising suspicion, a place he knew was occupied by someone he considered too old, too frail, and too stupid to ever suspect a thing. My basement had been Robert's workshop. It was a sprawling space, filled with his old drafting tables, tools, and stacks of blueprints. Julian had never shown any interest in it. It was dusty and filled with the ghosts of a life he didn't care about. When I went down the creaking wooden stairs, a damp, earthy smell filled the air. I flicked on the single bare bulb, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. I didn't know what I was looking for. A hidden safe, a locked file cabinet. I ran my hands along the stone walls, searching for anything out of place. After an hour, I found it tucked away in the far corner behind a stack of Roberts. Old architectural magazines was a section of the wall that looked newer than the rest. The mortar was a lighter shade of gray. I pushed against it. Nothing. I knocked on the stones. Most of them returned a dull thud, but one near the floor echoed. It was hollow. My heart hammered against my ribs. I hurried back upstairs and found a crowbar in Robert's old toolbox. My hands shook as I worked the edge of the crowbar into the seam. It took all my strength, my 71-year-old muscles screaming in protest. But finally, with a groan of scraping stone, the block came loose. Behind it was not a safe full of cash or documents. It was a small, dark cavity, and inside was a sleek black metal box with a single blinking green light, a hard drive, a server, a digital fortress hidden within the stone foundation of my own home. Julian had been running his entire criminal enterprise from beneath my feet. He had hidden his secrets in the one place he was sure they would never be found, guarded by the woman he was so diligently robbing. The arrogance of it was breathtaking. He had made my home his bank vault, and he had made me its unwitting security guard, and I knew as I stared at that blinking green light that I was holding the key to his destruction. The blinking green light seemed to mock me from the darkness of the alcove. For a moment, I was paralyzed. What did I, a woman who still struggled with her television remote, know about a piece of technology like this? It was a black box of secrets, and I had no key. Pulling it out could corrupt the data, or worse, alert Julian in some way. Leaving it was not an option. He had violated the sanctity of my home, turning Robert's foundation into a crypt for his crimes. The audacity of it fueled a rage so cold and pure it felt like ice water in my veins. I pushed the stone back into place, making sure it looked undisturbed. Then I went upstairs, my mind working more clearly than it had in years. I had the location of his digital brain, but I needed a neurosurgeon. I called Frank. "You found his server in your basement." Frank's voice was a mixture of shock and admiration. "The nerve of that son of a bitch. Okay, Evelyn, don't touch it. Don't even breathe on it. This is our chance. This is the whole damn game." "What do we do, Frank? We can't just take it to the police. Julian would claim it was planted. It would be my word against his again." "You're right." Frank agreed. "We can't move it. We have to access it right where it is. We need a white hat hacker, a good one, someone who can get and copy everything without leaving a trace and get out. I know a guy, has expensive, and he's eccentric, but he's the best ghost in the machine I've ever seen." 2 nights later, a skinny young man with purple hair and a laptop covered in cyberpunk stickers was sitting in my kitchen drinking the chamomile tea I'd made him. He called himself Nix. He looked no older than 20, and he had a nervous energy that made him seem like a startled bird. But when Frank briefed him on the situation, his eyes, dark and intelligent, took on a laser-like focus. "So the target is a custom-built server, likely air-gapped, hidden behind a false wall." Nick summarized, his fingers already tapping restlessly on his lap. "The trustee, this Julian guy, probably accesses it via a dedicated encrypted line that he only activates when he's physically nearby, likely from his car on the street to minimize the signal's discoverability. The goal is a full forensic clone of the drive in and out, leaving 0 digital footprints. Yeah, I can do that. It's elegant. The plan was set for the following Tuesday. Julian had a weekly standing dinner at the Claremont Club in Berkeley, a pretentious affair he never missed. It would give us a 4-hour window. Frank would act as lookout, parked in his unassuming sedan at the end of the block. Nix and I would go into the basement. The waiting was agony. I spent the days playing my part, the doddering aunt I called Julian to ask a patently stupid question about how to record a television program just to reinforce his narrative. His condescending patience was almost unbearable, but I held on picturing that blinking green light in the cellar. I was no longer just a victim. I was a conspirator, a hunter, setting a trap. On Tuesday night, the fog rolled in thick blanketing Pacific Heights in a ghostly silence that was perfect for our purpose. At 7:15 p.m., Frank called, "Hess gone. Car just left the garage." "You're clear." Nix, dressed in black, slipped into my house like a shadow. He carried a heavy backpack filled with equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. We descended into the basement to the single bare bulb, casting our elongated shadows on the stone walls. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Nix worked with a silent, breathtaking efficiency. He removed the stone, his movements precise and economical. He produced a device from his bag and attached a series of fine, needle-like probes to the server. "Okay, I am in," he whispered, his eyes glued to his laptop screen as lines of green code cascaded down it. "He's got some serious encryption here, military grade, but he's lazy about his passwords. People always are." He began to type, his fingers flying across the keyboard in a blur. The basement was silent except for the frantic clicking of the keys and my own ragged breathing. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only 20 minutes before he grunted in satisfaction. "Got it. The password is a variation on your husband's birthday. Sicko." "Okay. Cloning process initiated. This is the slow part. It's a multi-terabyte drive. It's going to take at least 2 hours to copy everything." 2 hours, every creak of the old house, every distant siren sent a jolt of panic through me. I stood watch at the small basement window, peering out at the street, my eyes straining to pierce the thick fog. Nix, for his part, seemed preternaturally calm, his gaze fixed on the progress bar inching its way across his screen. So he said, his voice startlingly casual in the tense silence, "Frank tells me this guy is trying to steal your house." "And everything else," I replied, my voice tight. "My grandmother got taken by one of these scams," he said, his eyes not leaving the screen. "A mail-in psychic convinced her she was cursed and drained her savings account. She was so ashamed. She never told anyone. I only found out after she died. That's why I do this, for the grandmothers." His words, so simple and sincere, forged an unexpected bond between us in the dusty dark. We were an unlikely team. The 71-year-old widow and the purple-haired hacker united against the predators of the world. Just as the progress bar hit 98, Frank's voice crackled through the small walkie-talkie Nix had given me. "Car's coming. It's him." Hez early panic seized me cold and sharp. "Hez back. Nix, Hez back." Nix didn't even flinch. His fingers became a blur. "Just need 60 more seconds. 50. 9:58. He was counting down, his voice, a low, steady mantra. I could hear the sound of a car engine idling just outside, the crunch of tires on the gravel of my driveway. He was home. He was walking to the front door. 40, Nix muttered. I could hear the jingle of keys at my front door. My front door. The key Robert had given me. 30. The lock turned. The heavy oak door creaked open. I could hear his footsteps in the hall directly above us. 20. He was calling my name. "Aunt Evelyn. You home?" I forgot my briefcase. 10:08. His footsteps were moving toward the basement door. "Done," Nix whispered, yanking the probes free. "Cloning complete. We're clean." He shoved his laptop into his bag and slid the server back into the wall, just as the doorknob to the basement began to turn. I fumbled with the heavy stone block, my hands slick with sweat. There was no time Julian was opening the door. The old wooden door at the top of the stairs groaned open, slicing a sharp rectangle of light into the dusty darkness of the basement. Julian's silhouette filled the frame. "Aunt Evelyn," he called down, his voice laced with a mixture of confusion and irritation. "What on earth are you doing down here? It's freezing." My mind went blank with terror. Nix was pressed into the shadows behind an old furnace, completely obscured. But I was standing in the middle of the room, my hands covered in dust and mortar, a crowbar lying at my feet near the freshly sealed wall. The blinking green light from the server was now hidden, but the evidence of my work was all around me. Thinking faster than I ever had in my life, I summoned the image of the frail, confused woman he'd so carefully constructed for me. I let out a small, startled cry and stumbled backward, feigning a fright. "Oh, Julian, you scared the life out of me." I pressed a hand to my chest, forcing my breathing to become shallow and panicked. He came down the stairs, his expensive shoes scuffing on the gritty steps. His eyes swept the room, lingering for a fraction of a second on the crowbar and the disturbed dust on the floor around the wall. I saw a flicker of suspicion in his gaze, a tightening around his mouth. "What were you doing?" he asked again, his tone sharpening. I had to give him an answer that fit his narrative. A confused old woman lost in nostalgia, prone to odd behavior. I was looking for Roberts. Old things. I said, my voice watery with manufactured emotion. I had a dream about him last night, about the model ship he was building before he passed. I thought it might be down here, but I got dizzy. I swayed, slightly gripping the edge of a workbench for support. This old place, so many memories. He watched me, his eyes cold and analytical. He was weighing my performance. He walked over to the section of the wall where the server was hidden. He ran his hand over the stones, his fingers brushing against the still fresh mortar. My heart stopped. He was so close. One good push, and he would know. But his arrogance, his absolute conviction in my senility, was my greatest shield. He couldn't conceive of a world where I was capable of outsmarting him. To him, I was just a sad old woman chasing ghosts in a dusty basement. "You shouldn't be down here by yourself, Aunt Evelyn," he said finally, his voice shifting back to its familiar, condescending warmth. It was a chillingly effective performance. "It's dangerous. You could fall. Come on, let's get you upstairs and make you a cup of tea." He put a hand on my arm to guide me, and the touch felt like a spider crawling on my skin. He was dismissing the evidence right in front of him because it didn't fit the story he wanted to believe. As he led me up the stairs, he glanced back one more time at the wall, a slight frown creasing his brow. The seed of doubt had been planted, but it hadn't yet sprouted once. Nix had slipped away into the night, the drive clones safely in his possession. The next phase of the war began. For the next 2 weeks he worked from his anonymous apartment, decrypting the mountains of data. He sent me encrypted updates through a secure messaging app he'd installed on a burner phone he'd given me. The picture that emerged was more horrifying than I could have imagined. Julian wasn't just running one scam. He was running a dozen. He had a portfolio of victims, most of them elderly, most of them widows or widowers he'd met through charity functions or estate lawyers. He used the same model every time, gain their trust, create an ironclad, irrevocable trust, and then slowly bleed their assets into a complex web of offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Panama, all funneling back to shell corporations controlled by him. My estate, worth nearly $15 million, including the house, was his crown jewel. The server contained everything bank records forged, documents a detailed ledger of every dollar he had stolen, and even a log of his aversions, notes on his victims' weaknesses, their fears, their emotional vulnerabilities. He had a file on me that referred to my lingering grief and technological illiteracy as primary exploit vectors. Reading it made me physically ill. He had also been systematically liquidating my husband's stock portfolio, the blue-chip stocks Robert had so carefully curated over 50 years, and investing the money in high-risk volatile cryptocurrency schemes. He was gambling with our life savings, using any profits to fund his lavish lifestyle and his grand philanthropic ambitions. The pledge to match donations for the Children's Hospital. Benefit wasn't a pledge. It was a laundry machine. He intended to use the influx of legitimate donations to wash his stolen money, donating it back through one of his shell corporations to emerge on the other side as clean tax-deductible reputation-building cash. "He's a monster," I said to Frank over the phone, my voice shaking with rage. "He's using sick children as a cover for his crimes. It's time, Evelyn." Frank said, his voice grim. "We have more than enough. I've spoken to a contact of mine at the FBI's white-collar crime division in San Francisco. He's very interested in seeing what Nix has uncovered. We also give this to the SEC. He's violated so many financial regulations, he'll be lucky if he ever sees daylight again. And we give it to the IRS. They tend to get very personal about this sort of thing, but I knew that wasn't enough. I didn't just want him in jail. I wanted to destroy the one thing he cared about, more than money, his reputation, the public image of Julian Vance. The brilliant financier and beloved philanthropist, I wanted to burn it to the ground in front of the very people he was trying so desperately to impress, the Children's Hospital Foundation. Benefit was in 3 days at the Fairmont Hotel on Nob Hill. It was to be his coronation as one of San Francisco's elite. I decided it would be his execution. I called Marcus Thorne. "It's time." I said, "The FB. I will be contacting you within 48 hours. I need you to be in San Francisco tomorrow." Then I made another call to a young hungry reporter at the Chronicle named Ben Carter, who had written a few scathing pieces on corporate fraud. I gave him the barest outline of the story, promising him the exclusive of a lifetime if he met me for coffee. My plan was dangerous. Frank warned me against it. He wanted me to stay safe, to let the feds handle it quietly. "Don't poke the snake, Evelyn," he warned. "Let us put it in the cage." He built his kingdom on humiliation, Frank. I told him he counted on his victims being too ashamed to fight back. He deserves to have his world torn down in the light, not quietly dismantled in the dark. Robert was a builder. He respected foundations. Julian's foundation is made of lies, and am going to be the earthquake that brings it all down the night of the gala. I chose my dress carefully. It was a simple, elegant black gown, the one I had worn to the last symphony gala with Robert. I wore the pearl necklace he had given me for our 40th anniversary. I was not going as a victim. I was going as Evelyn Reed, Robert Reed's wife. I was a ghost from a life Julian had tried to erase. I arrived just as the main fundraising drive was beginning. The ballroom at the Fairmont was glittering, filled with the city's wealthiest and most powerful people. On the stage, under a spotlight, stood Julian. He was radiant, basking in the applause, holding a microphone. He looked out at the sea of adoring faces, the very picture of success and benevolence. "Tonight we have the power to change lives," he began, his voice smooth as silk, resonating with practiced sincerity. "And as a symbol of my commitment to this incredible cause, I am honored to renew my pledge to personally match every single dollar we raise here tonight." As he spoke, my reporter, Ben Carter, was quietly distributing a single-page printout to the influential guests at each table. And on the massive screens on either side of the stage, where a live tally of the donations was supposed to appear, a new image flickered to life. It wasn't the tally. It was the cover page of Julian's ledger, the one from the server, the one titled Vance Capital, Partners Asset, Liquidation, Aversion Analysis, and beneath it a list of names, my name, Marcus Thorne's name, and a dozen others, all of them widows, all of them elderly. A confused murmur rippled through the ballroom. Julian faltered, his smile twitching. He looked wildly at the tech booth at the back of the room, but it was too late. The image changed, showing a flowchart of his shell corporations with arrows pointing from the names of his victims to accounts in the Cayman Islands. Then I started walking. I walked from the back of the ballroom down the center aisle directly toward the stage. I didn't run. I walked with a slow, deliberate grace. The crowd parted before me, a hush falling over the room, as hundreds of pairs of eyes turned from the screens to me. The old woman in the black dress walking toward the man on the stage. Julian saw me. His face, projected 20 feet high on the screens, went from confusion to disbelief and then to pure, unadulterated panic. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a pasty, sickly white. The mask was gone. For the first time, I saw him for what he was, a terrified little boy caught in a lie. I reached the steps of the stage and stopped. I didn't need a microphone. In the dead silence of that vast ballroom, my voice clear and steady, carried like a judgment. "My name is Evelyn Reed," I said. My eyes locked on his. My late husband Robert and I were his first 7-figure investors. He called it the Aunt Evelyn Fund. A collective gasp went through the crowd. I saw Beatrice Langford, his diamond-draped companion from the newspaper, shrink away from the stage in horror. From the side of the ballroom, 2 men in dark suits, their faces grim and professional, began to make their way toward the stage. The FBI had arrived. Behind them stood Marcus Thorne, his face a mask of grim satisfaction. Julian stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish gasping for air. The entire world he had built, the reputation, the adoration, the power, had crumbled to dust in the space of 90 seconds. He had been so focused on the legal fortress he'd built that he never thought to guard against the truth. He looked at me, his eyes pleading as if begging me to stop. But I wasn't finished. I had one more thing to say, a final sentence to seal his fate in this room of his peers. He told me my husband's legacy was stagnant. I said, my voice ringing with the clarity of cold fury. He was wrong. My husband's legacy is honor, and yours, Julian, is right up there on that. Screen for everyone to see. The 2 FBI agents stepped onto the stage flanking him. One of them spoke his voice, calm but firm, a stark contrast to the chaos that was erupting in the room. "Julian, Vance, you're under arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, and money laundering." As they pulled his hands behind his back to cuff him, his eyes found mine one last time. They were filled not with remorse, but with a bottomless reptilian hatred. It was the look of a predator that has been outmaneuvered, a look of pure impotent rage. He had built his prison of paper and lies, and now he was trapped inside it as they led him away past the shocked faces of the city's elite, the people whose respect he craved more than air. I felt a profound and chilling quiet settle over me. The war was over. The noise had stopped. I didn't stay to watch the fallout. I didn't need to. I turned and walked out of the ballroom, leaving the chaos and the whispers behind me. I took a taxi back to Pacific Heights, back to the house that Robert built. I walked through the front door using the heavy brass key and stood in the quiet of the hallway. The grandfather clock chimed midnight, its familiar, comforting tone echoing through the silent rooms. The government would spend the next year untangling Julian's web. Most of the money was gone, vanished into the ether of the digital world, but they seized what was left of his assets. The house was returned to me, its title scrubbed clean of his cancerous touch. Marcus Thorne got his day in court, and his testimony, along with the mountain of evidence from the server, was enough to ensure Julian would spend the next several decades in a federal prison. He would grow old in a cage far more real than the one he had built for me. Sometimes I receive letters from the other victims, the other names from his ledger. They are letters of gratitude, stories of lives he had shattered that were now slowly being pieced back together. They call me a hero, but I don't feel like a hero. A hero acts out of courage and nobility. I acted out of something far colder, far more primal. I spend my days now in my garden. I prune Robert's roses. I pull the weeds. I nurture the new growth. My life is quiet again. The silence in the house is no longer menacing, it's peaceful. But the woman who lives here now is not the same one who trusted a smiling nephew with her life. That woman is gone forever, grief. I've learned is a strange and powerful thing. It can hollow you out, leave you fragile and exposed, but sometimes when it's violated, it doesn't just break you, it hardens you. It forges the soft metal of sorrow into something sharp and unbending. Julian thought my love for my husband was my weakness, the vulnerability he could exploit. He never understood that it was my armor and my weapon. He thought he was robbing a widow. He never realized he was desecrating a tomb, and in doing so, he woke the dead. The end.